Hello, and welcome to another episode of Medicine 3.0 presented by Bionic Health. Today, Dr. Catherine Isaac and I will be talking through the sleep module so that you can get a little bit of insight of what to expect and the components that are involved with it. Dr. Isaac, awesome to have you here again today.
Yes, I love to talk to one of my favorite bionic advisors.
Thank you. You have so many to choose from here. All right, so let's just kick it off right away. What are some of your favorite components of the sleep module, and why would you encourage someone to participate in this?
Sure. Well, I love the sleep module because I find it to be very comprehensive. And I think it's important to address the issue of sleep because it's an area that people get quite concerned about. And they can feel a lot of like trepidation and anxiety around their sleep habits. So it's important to have good sleep hygiene and to get good quality sleep for your health. But I think we also want to temper that with you know, have a good understanding of the risks associated of not sleeping well versus the risks associated with, diabetes or having like uncontrolled high blood pressure. So we want to put things into perspective, meaning that it's important. There are good strategies out there to address it and to understand what's impeding good quality sleep. But it's also in terms of thinking about it compared to these other risk factors, it's not immediately life threatening in that way. So I hope that was clear. But what I like about our sleep module is that we think about sleep hygiene from the perspective of what the person is experiencing, meaning we do a sleep diary. And so the member will record what they're doing in the morning, what they're doing throughout the day, what happens before bedtime, and to their best of their ability, report that information, which actually provides a lot of insight. So that's number one. Complementary to that, we also use wearable data. So a person might have a Whoop or an Aura, or they might be using their Apple Watch to collect this data. Garmin is another one, and that wearable data is getting directly collected and updated in our electronic medical record. And that provides some important information about different wearable targets. And then we compare that sleep diary information with the wearable data. So that's one, or I should say, two essential components of our sleep module. In addition to that, we're doing an extensive history right now. Our bionic advisors are taking an extensive history around what's happening throughout the day, what's happening around sleep. And we do some important surveys like assessing stress levels, assessing any symptoms of depression that could be contributing, looking for symptoms and signs of sleep apnea that might warrant additional testing, and also doing a chronotype evaluation, which is a simple, short survey that assesses whether you're more of a morning person, midday person, or a nighttime person, which is quite helpful when we're thinking about sleep hygiene strategies. So we have an intensive history evaluation that we do. We do these important surveys. We do sleep diary data and wearable data. So that sounds like a lot already. But in addition to that, we have some additional components that we're testing. We do some lab tests. We look at thyroid function, basic metabolic panel. For women, we test progesterone levels. And then we also do serum cortisol levels, and that's an AM cortisol. And then we also do a salivary cortisol test, which is separate from the blood testing. And that is an interesting test that we ask members to do, in the sense that you have to collect your own saliva over the course of the day. And we look at the diurnal variation of cortisol in your body throughout the day. And diurnal means the variation between the morning and the evening. So typically a person has a high level of cortisol that spikes in the morning, and then it trends down over the course of the day, and it makes this nice curve. And so when we do these salivary cortisol tests, we're looking to see if your levels are within the expected curve.
Amazing. Thank you for that detailed review of the steps that members will go through. Can you tell us a little bit more about, let's start with the cortisol, since we just reviewed that.
Mhm.
So, what specifically are you looking for a normal difference between the morning and the evening? And what are some causes that might cause a higher level that could be, I'm assuming the higher levels are impacting the sleep, right?
Yes.
So, what might be some lifestyle or situational things that are causing those higher levels that might impact sleep as well?
Sure. So, one of the things we're looking for, we're expecting that morning spike. And if people do not have a typical morning spike, if it's low, then that requires further evaluation. So we want to certainly make sure they're not having any symptoms or signs of adrenal insufficiency, which is a more significant clinical diagnosis, which you diagnose with, different blood tests. But it also could be kind of a sign of burnout. So if someone's been in high stress situations, particularly chronically, they may not have as much of a peak in the morning, which could lead them to feel tired in the morning. In terms of evening, sometimes you can see higher levels of cortisol in the evening, which also could be attributed to a higher stress state. So it's almost the opposite of burnout in the sense that that person is still hyper vigilant in the evening and not able to calm down. And that can make it difficult to fall asleep. You're not really winding down. So that's another abnormal finding that we can note for our members. Patients who have depression can also have abnormal salivary cortisol levels that may be lower than expected as well. And so it's not that the cortisol levels are necessarily the issue, the core issue. They may be a reflection of the fact that the person is experiencing depression.
Can you walk us through some of the labs that you mentioned? What specifically are you looking at, and what are some of the indications you might find?
Sure. So, certainly, if we have a member who's telling us that they're really tired, they're waking up and not feeling refreshed, that could also be due to hypothyroidism, which means you don't have enough thyroid hormone circulating. And so, rather than focus on improving sleep hygiene, you want to make sure not to miss a diagnosis of hypothyroidism. And we're testing for that with the thyroid stimulating hormone and a free T4. Um, and Less commonly, I mean, you could also pick up hyperthyroidism, where a person would feel a sense of restlessness, maybe too much energy, difficulty calming down, and that would be because of excessive levels of thyroid hormone in their system. So we're looking for that. This is very unlikely, but if you had some electrolyte abnormalities or kidney dysfunction, certainly advanced kidney issues, people can have difficulty with sleep wake. I'm not expecting to find that with our members, but we do look for that as well. And then progesterone levels are helpful for women, not for men, particularly if they have very low progesterone levels that could potentially signal difficulty with sleep. And those are things that we can see for people who are in the perimenopause, menopause phase. Menopause, I'm expecting that you have low progesterone. That is a normal finding. In perimenopause, you may have levels that are kind of bouncing around, but sometimes it's hard to make that diagnosis of perimenopause if the woman is still having regular periods. She may be having other symptoms like difficulty with sleep, irritability, fatigue, waking during the night, but still be having regular periods. And it can be a clue. It's not a definitive diagnosis, but it can be a clue that actually it sounds like this might be related to perimenopause.
That's super interesting. Another just kind of side comment on progesterone in the menstrual cycle, particularly in premenopausal females.
Mm-hmm.
Um, During the luteal phase, we see a spike in progesterone, and that causes an increase in body temperature, which
Mm-hmm.
often disrupts sleep as well. So, even from phase to phase, women might be seeing a difference. So, that might be an important consideration for people doing this module that are premenopausal.
Yeah, yeah, very good.
Yes. So, what about the sleep diaries? Can you tell me a little bit more about those and also the chronotype and maybe even how people become different chronotypes?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and there's a lot of information out there to go into more details on chronotype. But basically, what we're just trying to assess is if you're typically a morning person, typically an evening person. And I would say, at least in our society, in our culture, you kind of have to be an all day, all night person, right, with the level of productivity that we expect from ourselves. But there are just some of us who are naturally, it's easy to wake up in the morning. We feel, bright eyed and bushy tailed and ready to go. But as, 8 o'clock rolls around in the evening, we're already looking to get into bed. And then you have some folks who it's really hard to wake up in the morning. They feel sluggish. They don't feel like they're necessarily clear thinking, clear minded. And that can be challenging for that person when you have to be at work at 8 a.m., when that might naturally be a time when you are ready to wake up, but you're still, ready to work late into the evening and still highly productive at 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 10 p.m., and ready to go to bed at 12 o'clock. So you can see how this can impact like level of function, productivity, if you're trying to operate at a time that's outside of your typical and usual chronotype. Some of those things may be outside of our control, depending on work hours. And certainly if you have a family that you're caring for, you can't necessarily tell your children, hey, I know you're a morning person, you're up at 6, but I'm an evening person. So you're going to have to just take care of yourself until I'm ready to go. But it certainly can be important for, encouraging you to sort of stay with your sleep hygiene regimen. And I'll use myself as an example. I'm a morning person. My husband is a late night person. So he's much more productive late into the evening and will stay up later. But sometimes I want to be able to spend quality time with him and I'm staying up later, or vice versa. He might be waking up early to try to help me get the family ready in the morning. And, so we have to kind of be aware of what each of our optimal times are, and also, try to I've got to try to sometimes allow myself to go to bed early and vice versa, allow him to sleep in and to stay up later, because that's just what's natural for both of us. Hope that was clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for some of the sleep diaries and the chronotypes. Let's
Well, I
talk
wanted
about,
to share, if I may, Kelly, and sorry to
yeah.
interrupt you, but just to go into the sleep diary, I find that when I'm actually doing the review of the sleep data, I find that to be really interesting, and I think to help provide important insights. So we do a morning sleep diary and a nighttime sleep diary. So the morning is the recall of the night. What time did I get into bed? How long do I think it took me to fall asleep? Did I wake up at all during the night? How long was I awake? What time was I up in the morning? Did I ever feel refreshed? So that's the morning sleep diary for the most part. And the nighttime sleep diary is a recall of your day. Did I get any sunlight during the day? Did I do any exercise during the day? Did I have any caffeine or any other things that are going to disrupt my sleep during the night? What did I do before bedtime? And what time, again, uh, not what time I'm getting into bed, but kind of how am I feeling? So that can be really, really useful information, because one, it helps us to identify any discrepancies between what's going on for that person from what they're recalling and what is the wearable data showing. And so that's super useful, because we're always asking the question, like, is the wearable data accurate and useful? Um, and then the other interesting thing is, like, where can we start to make some lifestyle changes and implement important sleep hygiene changes? So if that person's having a lot of caffeine, or if they're having alcohol or marijuana, which can disrupt sleep, then we want to know about that. And we want to see, okay, well, it looks like, you had 2 drinks on this night. You woke up multiple times during the night and you felt groggy in the morning. And then here you had some nights where you didn't have alcohol and that didn't occur. So that's like a clear example of how something that we're doing during the day may be impacting our nighttime sleep and recovery. Other information that's interesting is, again, like, how did exercise impact you? Oftentimes, it's not true always, but oftentimes if a person is exercising, they tend to feel more tired in the evening and feel more ready to fall asleep. And then lastly, I also think it's super interesting to hear about what a person is doing before bedtime. And it's quite interesting what people are using to wind down. And I would say a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people use scrolling on their phone or something like that as wind down time. And I actually wouldn't qualify that as being super relaxing. I think it may be a useful distraction if there are like stressful things on your mind and it can be hard to stop thinking about them. I think using social media or television can be a helpful distractor to say, okay, this feels overwhelming. I can't keep my attention focused on this overwhelming problem right now. So this helps me to shift my attention to something else. It doesn't necessarily promote relaxation. I also think it's important to think about what is the content I'm looking at. So, like, if you're watching something on true crime, which was, my mom used to love to watch like crime shows right before bedtime, and I would say, like, how could you possibly sleep? This is not relaxing. Because that was how I responded to something like that. But just in general, it's not really facilitating relaxation. So, gathering that information in the sleep diary is useful, and to say, like, okay, well, this is what I'm noticing the pattern is before bedtime. Let's talk about other ways to facilitate sleep. One of the things that we know is that I think Matt Walker says you have to cool down to calm down and warm up to wake up. And so your body temperature, your internal body temperature cools down at bedtime, and that helps facilitate sleep. And so he'll actually say it's good to take something like a hot shower or warm bath before bedtime. That vasodilates the blood vessels in your skin, allows you to release heat, and then that allows you to cool down your core body temperature, which helps to facilitate sleep. And so I like to encourage folks to do something like that. Warm shower, warm bath, even like a heating pad in bed or blanket, or a sauna if you have, to help promote relaxation before bedtime.
Awesome. You brought up a bunch of things that I wanted to dive into next, so that was perfect. I'd like to start with the wearables. What
Mhm.
are some of the biggest discrepancies that you see with the wearables? And of course, there's multiple different ones, and they often have different proprietary um, equations to calculate things. So, what are some of the biggest issues or differences that you see between those and the sleep diary? Because I think a lot of times we use our data, but it's how accurate is it? I guess.
hmm Yeah, I think that's always a question we're asking ourselves, the user themselves, how accurate is my sleep data? And also then us as the clinical team asking that about the data that we're collecting. And when we designed the sleep module, I wanted to use targets that were available across the board. So it didn't matter which wearable you were using. So I know that some have a sleep score, et cetera. So that may be specific to that wearable. So when we're looking at targets, I'm not necessarily looking at that one specifically, although of course we can collect that data and we can review it. Um, but the things that we're actually looking for are like total time slept. So we're looking for sleep efficiency, and that is the total time asleep divided by the time in bed, and then times 100 to create a percentage. So, if you want to have a higher quality sleep efficiency greater than 85%, meaning that 85% of the time you were in bed, you were asleep or more, and that we would consider that a good target. So we're looking at what The sleep wearable measures for sleep efficiency, and then I can also compare that to what the person is reporting, and to their best guess is sleep efficiency. And so that actually can help identify some obvious errors with the wearable data. So, for instance, if a person says, I got into bed at 9 o'clock, I read for 20 minutes, and I think I started to fall asleep around, 20 after, something like that. But if I look at their wearable data and it says, in bed at 9, asleep at 9:05, I'm less likely to trust that data if that person's recalling, I read for 20 minutes. I know I read. I looked at the clock at 9:20. So that to me is a discrepancy. And I will say that I have seen that pretty often, which causes me to lean towards the sleep diary data when I'm looking at sleep efficiency. We do collect the sleep efficiency from the wearable and review that. But again, I'm kind of from the diary data sort of saying, okay, does this seem accurate or not? Which I think is quite useful. I think it's good for people to know in general. It's good for the member to know, because they may be relying quite heavily on what their wearable data is telling them. And so when they see this discrepancy between the wearable and what they're actually reporting, that is, I think, a useful piece of information for them to have. Because sometimes we can get overly focused on what the wearable is telling us. And, we can get overly focused on what is our score in the morning. And to me, it's much more useful to ask, the member to ask themselves, how am I feeling? Like, I don't want my wearable data to tell me how to feel. And I recall another interesting study that I heard about, where they had put people in a room without clocks, and they allowed some to sleep for 4 hours and some to sleep to 8. And I'm not going to get the details of this accurate. So if we want accurate details on the study, we can find the study and pull it up. But basically, what they did was they blinded the participants to how much they slept. And they told one group that they had 8 hours of sleep, and the other group that they told had 4. But so people who slept 4 hours but told they slept 8, reported feeling very refreshed and feeling good and feeling able to focus, and vice versa. People who slept 8 but told they slept 4 reported feeling really tired and sluggish and like they couldn't concentrate. So I think that's really interesting. If you're looking to your wearable to tell you how you feel, it may or may not be accurate. And so you don't want to hang your hat on that and decide how you're going to go about your day based on what that data is telling you. And I think just to extrapolate even one step further than that, is I even kind of have that dialogue with myself depending on how much I slept the night before. So I might hear myself sort of forecasting, oh, I'm going to have a hard day. In fact, case in point, last night, I woke up at 5 a.m. I could have slept another hour and a half, even 2 hours if I wanted to, just coincidentally last night. But I woke up at 5 a.m. and I was up. And, I had that internal dialogue of, oh, I'm up 2 hours earlier than I planned on. I went to bed late. I was watching a movie in bed. I did not have good sleep hygiene. I was watching a action flick. And then I said, oh, I'm probably going to feel tired. I'm probably not going to have as good of a day as I could have if I had slept longer. And I kind of paused on that thought and said, okay, well, that is one possibility, or I might feel good. So it's interesting just how suggestible we can be. And yeah, I think it's just important to share that example.
That's super interesting. I know that occasionally we'll come across some people that might say, "Oh, I only need 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night, and I'm good," and it tends to be the case for them. But it sounds like maybe our own influence might be impacting that because, of course, long term, it's not optimal. And I had someone refer to sleep as low hanging fruit, and I think it's totally accurate, especially for recovery from exercise. So let's talk a little bit about some of the chronic negative impacts of a lack of sleep?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe also, can you sprinkle in like what is optimal, and are there differences between different stages of life, and also between males and females?
Oh, those are such great questions. I'll share the information that I know. So optimally, we're trying to aim for 7 to 8 hours per night. Too little sleep is not good. Too much sleep is not good either. Now, I'd like to stipulate that when I say that, I'm not talking about on a night to night basis. And this is really important because I think when people are interested in optimizing their sleep, they'll hear that information out there and say, like, oh, too little's not, too much is not good. Okay, well, I have to make sure that I get between my 7 to 8 hours. And you're going to have nights where you have 4 or 5 hours, and then maybe you'll have that day where you're actually able to sleep, longer, and you have a 9 hour night, and that's okay. What we're talking about when we say too little or too much is no good, we're talking about like prolonged phases of sleep deprivation or prolonged excessive sleep. So do not worry if you're having some nights here or there that are less than what is ideal. When they talk about mortality data and people who sleep like 5 hours a night or less, uh, they're looking at years of chronic sleep deprivation. They're not saying that if you sleep like that for a few weeks, your risk of death is dramatically higher. So the studies that I've seen are looking at chronic sleep deprivation over years of time. So I think just in general, that's important to understand because again, you're going to have phases in life and stressors that come up, and maybe you have a young one at home, or maybe you have someone who's ill, and it's going to disrupt your sleep cycle. And just understand that to the best of your ability, you want to kind of correct for that when you can. But so that gives you an idea of kind of what we're aiming for ideally for sleep. Um, in terms of differences over the course of life, I mean, certainly I started to mention a bit about perimenopause and menopause can be a time of sleep disruption and sleep change for women specifically. So you have changes in a variety of hormone levels. I mentioned progesterone. You have other changes in neurosteroids that are beyond kind of my in-depth understanding, so I won't try to explain it. But because of that, people who didn't have sleep disruption before begin to have wake ups during the night. And so, a typical pattern in the perimenopause and menopause phase of life is that the person will have no trouble falling asleep, but they'll have trouble staying asleep and will wake up multiple times a night, even if it's not related to having hot flashes, which, of course, is another thing that's going to disrupt sleep. Another interesting thing in terms of phases of life, I believe that melatonin levels decline with age. And so when we look at data for the usage of melatonin, there is data to suggest usage of melatonin in elderly folks because they have lower levels. And so that is one particular case of members where I will recommend melatonin. Other times that I recommend melatonin are for like people who are shift workers who are maybe, coming off night shifts, or when you travel, it can be helpful for that. I don't generally recommend the usage of melatonin simply for people who are having trouble falling asleep. And I will also say that the dosages that you find in the over the counter supplements are much higher than what is necessary. And also, they're not, because it's not prescription, they're not controlled. And therefore, there can be a lot of variability in what is actually contained in the supplement. So, if you're purchasing 3 milligram or 5 milligram tablets or gummies of melatonin, it may actually contain higher doses of that. And there was a study that came out looking at um, supplements for pediatrics for children, and they found that they actually had I want to say it was like 10 times as much melatonin than what was reported on the bottle. And I can go back and double check my number on that. But certainly, you want to be cautious as a parent when you're giving your kids over the counter supplements.
While we're
Yeah,
talking about
go ahead.
supplements, um, could you talk a little bit more? Well, this isn't really a supplement, but a lot of people, I know you mentioned THC and the impact on the sleep architecture and even potentially sleep quality.
Mhm.
But there are gummies out there that are designed to help with sleep. And can you talk a little bit more about the impact that on from those on sleep?
That's a good question. When you're talking about, are you talking about like ashwagandha? I imagine that's a common
Okay.
one that is
Or
being
CBD
used.
gummies that don't have the THC, do those have a separate impact?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kelly. I find that super interesting. So, CBD may actually reduce core body temperature, which could facilitate sleep onset, but it hasn't been studied enough. So, we have insufficient data on that. And we don't know about its impact on sleep architecture. And so, I'm kind of a stickler for that. I find that to be fascinating to understand how things impact sleep architecture. And so I discourage the use of things that we know definitely impair REM sleep. So alcohol and THC, we know impact REM sleep. And that's also, again, you were kind of asking about differences in sexes, if there's a difference for sleep. One thing we do know is that during REM sleep, that's when you have testosterone production. So, if we have a member who is male and is concerned about energy level and is concerned about testosterone, and that's certainly one thing I'm asking about when I am, you know, going through the history with them and thinking about kind of therapeutic changes that we can make to their lifestyle and such. The other question, just in back to supplements. So ashwagandha is a common supplement that you see, and you see it in beverages now and everything. And what we do know is that it can actually help to reduce cortisol levels and has anxiety reducing properties. So it can be beneficial for sleep. It can help with sleep latency, which is how long it takes you to fall asleep. So, ashwagandha can be dosed twice a day. I'll often start with it in the evening to see if that is sufficient. And then, if that's not sufficient, then dose it twice a day and see if that can be helpful for a person. One thing, again, ashwagandha is a supplement, so it's not regulated. So, you want to try to find a reputable company that you're purchasing it from so that it most likely contains what it says that it contains on the bottle. And yeah, so I think that's important. There have been some rare case reports with ashwagandha for liver injury. And that's just a good reminder that whether something is a prescription medication or whether something is over the counter medication or an over the counter supplement or herb, if these things are biologically active in any way, you have to think about how it's metabolized and cleared from the body. And because of that, there's the potential for liver or kidney injury. And I think ashwagandha can be very useful, but I just don't like to use things willy nilly. You always want to remember that there's risks and benefits with everything.
Um, Last supplement we should probably chat about is magnesium glycinate. That's become a
Mhm.
pretty popular supplement to take for sleep. Can you talk about that? And do we see that to be a positive effect, or is it more
Uh,
placebo?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So there are different formulations of magnesium that are available, and that can be quite confusing. So there's magnesium oxide, magnesium glycinate, magnesium citrate, and magnesium threonate. And the one that I recommend for sleep is actually magnesium threonate because out of all of the different formulations of magnesium, magnesium threonate is the only one that crosses the blood brain barrier. So if we're using it as a supplement to promote sleep and relaxation, it makes sense that we're going to want the one that actually gets to where you want it to have activity. So I have had members say that they've had benefits with like magnesium glycinate, for instance, for sleep. And whether or not that's placebo effect or if the mag glycinate is actually, impacting their sleep, I'm not sure. So again, I preferentially use the magnesium threonate. But in terms of supplements, when we're talking about supplements for sleep, I would say I have a low threshold for using magnesium because in general, it's pretty safe. So I think it's a good one to try.
I do want to give a quick shout out to creatine. It has been found in research that during sleep deprivation, supplementing with creatine can help improve cognitive performance and kind of reverse those effects from sleep deprivation. So, for example, traveling jet lagged internationally or something like that would be a good time if you're not already taking it all the time. I'm not saying take it just once in a while. Of course, there's plenty of other benefits, but that's some recent research that's come out about creatine. So,
That's great. I love that. I love that you remind me about creatine because I'm like, oh, I forgot to take my creatine. Got to make that regular. Another thing that's interesting I wanted to mention was omega-3 fatty acids because if you have low levels of omega-3 fatty acids, that has actually been shown to reduce nighttime melatonin secretion. Now, I think we don't necessarily have that data that shows if you take more omega 3s that improves melatonin secretion or improves sleep. I think that those subsequent studies are not necessarily out there, and I can actually do the research because I haven't searched for them, but just not to my knowledge. But I am a fan of omega 3s in general. The diet in the United States is pretty low in fish in general, and so most of us have quite low omega-3 fatty acids. With our vascular module, we test omega-3 index, and so we can actually test to see how that is looking. But yeah, so that is another thing that I like to supplement.
amazing. Well, thank you for all of those great insights. Do you have any closing thoughts or remarks or things that you wanted to chat about that we may have missed?
I think I would say, like, if someone's questioning if they should do the sleep module or not, certainly you just want to reach out and chat with us about it. Um, I think that anytime you do a review of your sort of health habits, that is useful. Again, I think it's important because it helps us make use of the wearable data, but not to overly focus on that as the most important data to reflect on how someone is doing. And I think, yeah, we get some really good actionable insights for people when they do complete the sleep module.
I actually thought of one more question.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about caffeine and potentially nicotine as well.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see, or what levels of caffeine would someone be kind of concerned about for impacting sleep? What time should people ideally stop drinking caffeine? And then nutritionally, do you ever check in on that in the sleep module to see if maybe it's underfueling throughout the day that's causing this, and then people continue to have more caffeine, which then creates a vicious cycle of sleep deprivation potentially. So, what are your findings with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's another reason the sleep diary is quite useful because we ask about exercise, so we'll have an idea of how much that person is exercising, and if they have a high level of activity, that we can see. Sometimes that actually can be have an adverse effect on sleep if they're very very high active and under fueling, as you're saying. They can feel quite sluggish, and then, like you said, start taking caffeine or other things to try to feel more awake, which is like a vicious cycle. In general, I like to encourage folks to stay at 1 to 2 cups of caffeine in whatever source you like to take it. Some people like to actually have coffee. Some people enjoy tea. Some people enjoy caffeinated beverages is their preference. And I like to keep that before 1 to 2 p.m. Now, that being said, I also think it's particularly with caffeine, just in my clinical experience, I ask people, like, because you kind of feel the effect yourself. Like, I have been someone for most of my life where caffeine really didn't seem to impact me. Now, I understand that that also changes over time. So, if you were like that when you were young, it doesn't mean that it's going to be the same when you start getting into your 40s and 50s and 60s. Um, but just having a conversation with that person, some people can really feel the effects of caffeine, and some people don't really notice the impact whatsoever. So I would say I don't have like that hard of a line on that. 1 to 2 cups of coffee or the equivalent is like a general recommendation, but I like to have a conversation and sort of hear what that person is or is not doing. And then also just important to point out, if they are someone who's a high caffeine user, I discourage them stopping immediately cold turkey, because they'll definitely get rebound headaches in the morning, which are unpleasant. So you want to gradually wean down over time.
Amazing. And then timing wise, I think if I remember correctly, the caffeine half life is about 6 to 8 hours. I think it depends on the person, but that's just something to keep in mind timing wise.
Oh, that's
Um,
great. I actually don't know the caffeine half life, so I trust you, but we could always look it up after.
yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time as always, and I hope everyone enjoys our Sleep Module podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kelly.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Medicine 3.0. We make this podcast so that you know where to turn for good information on keeping you and your loved ones healthy. Feel free to check us out at bionichealth.com, where we can help you live a longer, happier life.